The drive home from Nashville Regional took 40 minutes on a good night. At 6:15 in the morning, after a 12-hour shift in the cardiac unit, it felt like 40 years. My scrub smelled like antiseptic and cold coffee. My feet ached in the particular way that only comes from standing on linoleum for hours on end, moving between beds, answering call lights, keeping people alive. All I wanted was to shower, check on my son, and sleep until the world made sense again. My husband's truck was in the driveway when I pulled in, so was his sister's car, a silver Honda with a cracked bumper that had been sitting in my driveway for 3 weeks now, ever since she showed up with 2 suitcases and a story about needing just a little time to get back on her feet after her divorce. 3 weeks had turned into a month. A month had quietly become an open-ended arrangement nobody had asked me about. The house was still dark except for the kitchen light. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. My son was asleep on the hallway floor. He was curled up on his side between the bathroom door and the linen closet, wearing his dinosaur pajamas, his small body wedged against the baseboard like he was trying to take up as little space as possible. His pillow was the folded arm of his hoodie. His blanket was a thin throw we usually kept on the living room couch. I stood there for a moment and could not move. His name, Noah, sat in my throat like something I could not swallow. I crouched down slowly, afraid to wake him too fast, and touched his shoulder. His skin was cool. The hallway was drafty. The old house always let cold air creep under the back door, and he had been sleeping here, on hardwood, with a couch throw, while his bedroom was 30 feet away. He stirred and opened his eyes. When he saw me, something in his face shifted. Not surprise, not relief, something quieter and more tired than either of those things. Like he had been waiting and was simply glad the waiting was over. "Mom." His voice was small and hoarse. "Baby." I pulled him up into my arms and he let me, pressing his face against my neck. "What are you doing out here?" He was quiet for a moment. "Aunt Vanessa's kids needed the big room," he said carefully, the way children speak when they have already rehearsed the explanation they were given. "She said her kids are littler and they get scared at night and need more space. Dad said it was just for a little while." I held him tighter. My jaw was clenched so hard my teeth ached. "She moved your things?" He nodded against my shoulder. "My Legos are in a box in the garage. She said they were a choking hazard for the little ones." He paused. "She threw away my planet poster, the one you got me from the Science Museum. She said it was ripped at the corner and not worth keeping." I carried him to the living room and sat on the couch with him in my lap, his legs dangling over the side because he was getting too long for this now. 8 years old and all arms and knees, but neither of us acknowledged that. I rubbed his back until his breathing evened out and he fell back asleep. Then I sat there in the gray morning light for a long time, listening to the house settle around me. My husband appeared in the doorway just after 7. He was in a t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair flattened on one side, squinting at me the way he always did when he was bracing for a conversation he did not want to have. "You're home early," he said. "Shift ended at 6. I looked at him. Our son slept on the floor last night. He exhaled through his nose and came into the room, sat in the armchair across from me with the posture of a man preparing a defense. Vanessa's kids were having a rough night. Kaylee had a nightmare and wouldn't calm down in the small room. It was a temporary thing. His planet poster is gone. It was torn. I bought him that poster. Megan." His voice dropped into the tone I had come to dread. Measured, slightly condescending, the tone that said I was making something large out of something small. "It's a poster. He's fine." He fell asleep in 2 minutes. "You're exhausted and you're blowing this out of proportion." I looked at my son sleeping on the couch with his head on my thigh and I thought about the 12-hour shift I had just come off of, the patient in room 14 who had coded at 3 in the morning, the charge nurse who had asked me to stay over because we were short-staffed and I had said yes because I always said yes because someone had to, and I came home to this, to my child on the floor of a hallway, to my husband telling me I was blowing things out of proportion. "Where is she now?" I asked. "Asleep." He hesitated. "Please don't wake her. She's had a hard few weeks." I did not say anything else. I sat with my son until he woke up at 8, made him breakfast, took him to school. On the drive, I asked him casually how long the sleeping arrangement had been going on. He thought about it. "Maybe 2 weeks?" he said. "Sometimes Dad lets me sleep in the big bed with him when you're on nights, but Aunt Vanessa said that's not good for kids. So, 2 weeks." My son had been sleeping in a hallway for 2 weeks, and no one had mentioned it to me, and when I found out on my own, I was the one told not to blow things out of proportion. I drove back home. I did not go inside. I sat in the driveway and called my friend from nursing school, the one who had gone to law school instead of finishing her RN, the one who now handled family law cases in a firm downtown. Her name was Claire, and she picked up on the third ring. "I need a recommendation," I said. "Family law. Someone good." There was a brief pause. "How bad?" "I don't know yet," I said, "but I think I need to know all my options." She gave me a name. Sandra Kim. She said Sandra was the kind of lawyer who did not waste time on sentiment and did not lose. I wrote the name in the Notes app on my phone and sat there another moment, looking at the front door of my house. Then I went inside. Sandra Kim's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the river. She was compact, precise, and unhurried, with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who are never rattled. She listened to everything I said without interrupting. When I finished, she put down her pen. "Tell me about the finances," she said. I told her. My husband had been out of work for 18 months, laid off from a project management firm, and the job search had been slow, he said. Inconsistent, the market was hard. I was the primary income. I had been for a year and a half. My salary, my benefits, my health insurance covering all 4 of us, including his sister's 2 children, who had been added to my plan 3 weeks ago because Vanessa's COBRA coverage had lapsed. And my husband had quietly signed the paperwork without asking me. Sandra's expression did not change, but something in her eyes sharpened. "He added dependents to your employer plan without your knowledge?" I got the notification email from HR. He said it was an emergency, that he had handled it, that I was being ungrateful about his family needing help. "Is there a joint account?" "Yes. We have a joint checking and a joint savings." "When did you last review the savings balance?" I told her the number I expected. She asked me to log into the account on my phone right then and read her the actual number. I did. The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. "That's $80,000 less than what you told me," she said. My hands went cold. I pulled up the transaction history. There were 17 transfers over the past 11 months, each one between $4,000 and $9,000, each one labeled with the same note, Home Renovation Reserve. There had been no renovations. There was a name attached to the receiving account. It was a company called Cornerstone Partners, LLC. I had never heard of it. Sandra told me not to touch anything in the account, not to say anything to my husband, and not to tip off his sister. She told me to come back the following Monday with 2 years of bank statements, tax returns, and any documentation I had of the home insurance, the mortgage, and the account my employer used for direct deposit. She told me the same things Michael Robertson told Harper in the story I had listened to someone narrate in a different language. Do not engage. Do not confront. Do not give him anything to use. Every word you say is a tool in someone else's hand. I left her office and sat in my car for a long time. Then I drove to the pediatrician and made an appointment for Noah for the following week, and I asked the receptionist to note in his file that I was the parent of record for scheduling purposes and that all appointment notifications should go to my phone only. Then I went home and made dinner and said nothing. The weeks that followed were the strangest of my life. A performance of ordinary life over a foundation that was crumbling. I worked my shifts. I came home. I made sure Noah had what he needed. I watched my husband move through our house with the ease of someone who believed everything was fine, and I watched his sister fill more and more of the space, her mail arriving at our address, her children's shoes lined up by the front door where Noah's used to be, her voice drifting from the kitchen in the afternoons when I was trying to sleep before a night shift. She came to me one Saturday afternoon when my husband was at the hardware store. I was folding laundry in the bedroom. She knocked twice and walked in without waiting, which she had started doing, and sat on the edge of the bed with her arms crossed and a look on her face that I'd seen before on people who believe they are about to deliver a generous truth. "I wanted to talk to you woman to woman," she said. I kept folding. "Okay. You've seemed tense lately. Ryan has noticed. I've noticed." She tilted her head. "I think part of the problem is that you have a hard time letting people help. You carry everything yourself and then you resent the people around you for not picking up your burden, but you never actually put it down." I set a shirt on the pile. "Is that what I do?" "I'm not criticizing. I'm genuinely trying to help. Ryan and I have been talking and we think—" She paused, correcting herself. "He thinks that a therapist might be useful for you. Someone to process the control issues." I turned and looked at her. She had the expression of someone waiting to be thanked. "My son slept on a hallway floor for 2 weeks," I said. "Because you took his bedroom." Her expression shifted just slightly. "Kids are adaptable. The little one's needed. He's 8 years old. This is his home." I turned back to the laundry. "I'd like you to give me a few minutes." She left. I heard her on the phone with my husband within the hour, her voice low and urgent from behind the closed door of what used to be my son's room. That night I took out my personal phone, not the one we shared a plan on, but the old one I'd kept on a separate prepaid line since nursing school, and I opened the voice memo app and pressed record. I slid it under a magazine on the kitchen table and left the room. My husband and his sister talked in that kitchen for 40 minutes. I sat in the hallway and listened to the sound of my marriage being discussed like a problem to be managed. The recording captured my husband saying that I had been unstable since the miscarriage, a loss that had happened 3 years ago, and that we had, I thought, grieved together. It captured his sister saying that if things went sideways, she could testify to my erratic behavior, my long absences, the way I prioritized work over the family. It captured my husband saying she'd never fight me for the house. She'd be too exhausted. It captured his sister laughing. I emailed the audio file to Sandra that night. Her reply came at 11:30. 3 sentences. "This changes everything. Do not delete. Come in tomorrow." The next 2 weeks moved like a controlled burn. Sandra filed for divorce, emergency temporary custody on grounds of child welfare disruption, and a financial freeze on the joint accounts pending audit. She flagged the transfers to Cornerstone Partners LLC and requested a forensic accounting review. She explained to me in her unhurried way that the $80,000 had been moved in increments, designed to stay under scrutiny thresholds, a pattern she had seen before, in cases where one spouse had been quietly preparing for a separation they hadn't announced yet. My husband called 17 times the morning he was served. I let each one go to voicemail. Sandra had instructed me to document everything and respond to nothing directly. His messages ranged from confused, angry, to something that sounded, toward the end, like genuine fear. The last one said only, "Just tell me where Noah is. Please, I need to know he's okay." Noah was at school. Noah was fine. The performance of crisis was not for Noah's benefit. His sister called from a number I didn't recognize. I recognized her voice anyway. "You're making a massive mistake," she said. "You don't know everything." "You're right," I said. "That's what the discovery process is for." And I hung up. She called back twice. On the third call, I let Sandra's paralegal handle it. The temporary hearing was on a Thursday morning. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, the kind of room where ordinary lives get sorted into columns and assigned dollar amounts. My husband arrived with an attorney, a local guy in a brown suit, who looked like he'd been retained on short notice and was already behind. My husband himself looked terrible. He had lost weight. His eyes were bloodshot, and he could not seem to decide whether to look at me or the floor, so he alternated between the two like a man watching a tennis match he was losing. His attorney presented him as a devoted father temporarily displaced by his wife's unilateral decision to flee the home, taking their son and freezing access to shared finances, leaving his client without resources. He described the household arrangement with Vanessa as a compassionate response to a family crisis. He said I was controlling, work-obsessed, emotionally unavailable, and that the sleeping arrangement for Noah had been a short-term solution that I had catastrophized out of proportion. Then Sandra stood up. She presented the 2-year financial record. She presented the 17 transfers and the LLC. She presented documentation that Cornerstone Partners LLC was registered in my husband's name at a Delaware address he had never lived at, managed through the same Wilmington law firm that handled 7 other shell entities currently under investigation by the Tennessee Department of Commerce for investment fraud. She presented Noah's school attendance record showing a pattern of my husband failing to pick him up on designated days, with school staff notes documenting that Noah had been waiting outside twice for over an hour. She presented my HR record showing 43 months of continuous employment, consistent performance reviews, and 0 disciplinary incidents. And then she played the recording. My husband's voice filled the courtroom. She'd never fight me for the house. She'd be too exhausted. His sister's laugh, high and pleased. The word unstable, the word miscarriage used as a weapon, as evidence of dysfunction, as a card to be played if things went wrong. The judge was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the expression of someone who had heard every version of every story and retained the capacity to be disgusted anyway. She watched my husband during the playback. He did not look at the recording device or the judge. He looked at the table. When it ended, the judge set down her pen. "Mr." She addressed my husband directly, which I understood was not always done. "You are on record in that audio stating that your wife would be too exhausted to fight for her home. You are on record discussing her medical history as leverage. You are on record with your sister planning potential testimony against your wife in a proceeding she did not know was being considered." She paused. "And you are on record having transferred $80,000 of marital funds into a company registered in your name without your wife's knowledge or consent." His attorney started to speak. The judge held up one hand. "Temporary sole physical custody is awarded to the petitioner. The respondent is granted supervised visitation pending the outcome of the financial audit and a home study. The joint accounts remain frozen. The respondent's sister is to vacate the marital residence within 72 hours. An order of protection is issued restricting the respondent from the petitioner's workplace and the child's school." She looked at my husband one more time. "The court takes a dim view of using a child's bedroom as bargaining currency, Mr. I'd encourage your attorney to ensure you understand the seriousness of the situation you are in." The gavel came down. My husband sat very still. His attorney was already leaning toward him, whispering. I walked out into the hallway with Sandra. My legs felt like they were made of something unreliable. "The financial investigation will take time," she said, not unkindly. "But you're protected. Noah is protected. Let the process work." She was right. The process worked. She was right. The process worked. The Tennessee Department of Commerce forensic audit took 6 weeks. At the end of it, Cornerstone Partners LLC was identified as one of several pass-through entities used to funnel investor funds into a real estate development scheme that had collected over $2 million from private investors and produced no actual development. The scheme had been structured by his sister's former husband, the same divorce that had prompted her arrival at my door, and my husband had been brought in as a secondary administrator, handling the domestic transfer mechanism while the larger fraud operated through a network of similar LLCs in 5 states. The FBI field office in Nashville opened a parallel investigation. My husband called me from a number I didn't recognize on a Tuesday evening. I picked up because Noah was at a school overnight, and I was afraid it was the school. It wasn't. His voice was flat in the way that voices get when a person has moved past anger into something emptier. He said he knew about the federal investigation. He said he needed me to tell them it had been a misunderstanding, that I had known about the transfers, that they had been consensual. He said if I did that, he would sign whatever I wanted, the divorce, the custody, everything. He would go away. I would never have to see him again. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "You put our son on the floor of a hallway for 2 weeks so your sister could have a better room. You stole $80,000 from our joint account. You used a miscarriage as potential courtroom ammunition." I paused. "There is nothing you can offer me that would be worth lying to a federal investigator." He started to say something. I ended the call. I texted Sandra immediately. She replied within 3 minutes. Document the call. Timestamp, number, summary of conversation. This is an obstruction attempt. Forward everything to the case agent. The arrests happened on a Friday. I was at work halfway through a shift when my charge nurse told me quietly that there was something on the news I might want to see. She walked me to the break room and pulled up the live feed on her phone. It was the parking lot of an office building in Brentwood, a suburb I had driven past 100 times, and there were 2 federal vehicles parked at angles outside, and 2 people being walked out in handcuffs. My husband in a gray jacket I recognized, his head down, his sister next to him, her expression furious and wild, pulling against the agent's hand on her arm. The Chiron read, 2 arrested in multi-state real estate investment fraud scheme. I handed my charge nurse her phone back. She put a hand on my arm. I stood there for a moment breathing, and then I went back to work because there were patients who needed care and the world continued to require tending regardless of what happened in its parking lots. Sandra called that evening. She told me that Vanessa had already agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced charge and that her cooperation would likely accelerate my husband's case significantly. She said the divorce proceedings would move quickly now. She said I had done everything right. You know what you should do tonight? She said, and there was something almost warm in her voice. What? Nothing. For once, absolutely nothing. I picked up Noah from school the next day and we went to Percy Warner Park and walked for 2 hours in the cold November afternoon, our breath visible in the air. He collected rocks and put them in his jacket pocket and told me about a book he was reading about deep-sea creatures that had their own light. He said he wanted to be a marine biologist or a chef, he hadn't decided. I said both seemed excellent. He took my hand as we walked back to the car and swung it back and forth the way he used to when he was 4. Mom, he said, are we going to have to move? I thought about it. I'm not sure yet. Maybe. Can we get a place with a yard? Absolutely. Can I have my room back? With my stuff in it. Baby, I said, you can have a whole new room. He thought about this. Can I paint it blue? Like really, really blue? You can paint it whatever color you want. He nodded seriously, satisfied, and climbed into the car. I stood outside for a moment with my hand on the door, looking at the trees. The leaves were almost all gone now. The branches were clean and stark against the sky, and there was something clarifying about the bare structure of things, the way the essential shape becomes visible once the surface has been stripped away. The final divorce hearing happened on a gray February morning. My husband appeared via video screen from the county facility where he was being held pending trial. He was in a green uniform. His face was thinner. He did not look at the camera. When the judge asked if he agreed to the terms of the settlement, full dissolution, sole legal and physical custody to me, the marital home to be sold with proceeds split according to the forensic audit's determination of recoverable funds, 0 contact order to remain in effect, he said yes. Quietly, once, and the transmission ended. The judge signed the decree. I was handed a copy by the clerk. I walked out through the revolving door into the cold morning air with a piece of paper in my hand that meant I was free. Sandra shook my hand on the courthouse steps. You were very calm in there, she said. I've been calm for a while now, I said. It was true. The shaking had stopped somewhere around the 6th week. What replaced it was not quite peace, not yet, but something steadier than what had been there before, a knowledge of my own coordinates. I sold the house in March. A young couple bought it, newly married, the wife pregnant with their first. She walked through the room slowly with her hands on her stomach and asked if the neighborhood was safe, if the school district was good, whether the old kitchen was going to be a problem. I answered honestly. She looked out the window at the backyard and smiled at something private and certain. I watched them sign the paperwork and felt nothing about the house. I felt something about her face, that particular look of a future still intact. Noah and I moved into a rental in East Nashville, a craftsman bungalow on a street with large trees, 2 bedrooms, a backyard with an actual garden left by the previous tenant, leggy and overgrown and full of potential. He chose blue for his room, a deep, saturated blue that the paint chip called Midnight Compass, and on move-in weekend we put on music and rolled it on together, and he said it was the best room he had ever had. He meant it. I could tell. His Legos were arranged on new shelves. I put up myself with a drill and a level. His planet poster. The Science Museum one that had been not worth keeping. I had replaced with a new one, larger, the whole solar system and the Kuiper belt, and a note in small text at the bottom about the distances between things. He studied it for a long time the night I put it up, tracing the names with one finger. "Mom," he said, "did you know there are objects in the outer solar system that haven't even been named yet?" I didn't know that. They just call them by numbers, until someone discovers them properly and gives them a name. He turned around and looked at me. I think that's kind of cool. Like they exist, they're just waiting to be known. I looked at him for a moment, 8 years old and earnest and alive in his midnight blue room, and I thought, yes, exactly like that. 3 months later, I was asked to speak at a community forum organized through the hospital's patient advocacy office, a panel on financial safety for women in healthcare, which sounds dry and administrative but was, in the room that evening, something else entirely. 22 women, ranging from nurses to administrators to a radiologist who had recently left a marriage that had drained her retirement account over 7 years. They sat in folding chairs with cups of coffee and the particular expression of people who have been holding something heavy for a long time and are wondering if it is finally safe to put it down. I told them about the joint account, about the transfers in increments small enough to avoid automatic flagging, about the recording I made on my phone in my own kitchen, about Sandra Kim's voice on the phone at 11:30 at night saying, "This changes everything," about standing in a courthouse parking lot with a document that said my son was safe and my life was mine again. I told them what I wish someone had told me earlier, that financial abuse is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It happens in the ordinary margins of a shared life, in the transfers and the paperwork and the quiet decisions made by the person who knows you will be too tired to check. I told them to check. I told them to have their own accounts, their own documents, their own names on things that mattered. A woman in the second row raised her hand at the end. She was maybe 30, with the look of someone who had come to the forum telling herself it was just for information. "What's the first thing you do?" she said. "When you realize something is wrong but you're not sure how wrong yet?" I thought about it. "You make one phone call," I said, "just to someone who knows more than you do. You don't have to decide anything that night. You just have to know what your options are." She nodded slowly. The room was very quiet. On the drive home, I called my mother, which I had been doing more often lately, and told her about the forum. She asked about Noah. I told her about the room, the blue paint, the planet poster, the Legos. She laughed and said it sounded like he was settling in. I said he was. I said I was too. It was a Tuesday in May, the windows down and the city going by in the warm early dark, and somewhere behind me was a year I would not have chosen and could not undo. And somewhere ahead was a street with a craftsman bungalow and a boy who wanted to be a marine biologist or a chef, still undecided, and a backyard full of plants that needed to be learned. The distance between those two things was everything.